Albany 783 Triple M. Well, when things go wrong in the workplace, the worst case outcome for an employment perspective sometimes results in an employee being terminated from their role. And if it comes to this, there's some specific things that need to be considered, both from the employer's perspective and from an employee's perspective. We want to delve into this issue of unfair dismissal a little bit more with HR expert Jonathan Woolfrey. How are you, Jonathan?
I'm very well, thanks, Anthony.
Busy time of the year for you?
Yeah, for sure. I think everyone's realising that December is not too far away, and we've only got a few weeks left to get all our workplace issues sorted. So, yes, it is definitely very busy.
Okay. What actually is unfair dismissal and what makes it unfair?
Yeah, it's a good question because many people think a dismissal may be unfair, but there's very specific definitions of what make it unfair according to legislation. So if we look at the Commonwealth system, they've defined unfair dismissal as a dismissal that's harsh, unjust or unreasonable, and most employees are covered by the national system. The state system does have similar type protections along similar lines, but it's that harsh, unjust or unreasonable manner. So that's how it's defined, not whether or not we like it or not whether an employer or an employee like it, but in those specific terms. But that in itself can be complicated.
What factors need to be considered then to prevent an unfair dismissal?
Yeah, look, first of all, I'd just say that each situation is different and there's a lot of complexity in there. I think it's a bit of a shame that there's so much complexity half the time, but there is, depending on whether you're casual, permanent, fixed term, how long you've been there for, etc. But what is important, two things, if I just want to summarise those, and they're pretty much enshrined in the legislation, is two concepts known as natural justice and procedural fairness. And if either an employer or an employer is unfortunately considering this outcome, if they keep natural justice and procedural fairness front of mind, it'll really help. So just briefly, natural justice is generally referred to as an employee or a person's right to be heard, to make a submission, to have input into a decision that affects them. So in any process in the workplace, particularly unfair dismissals, it always helps significantly and sometimes particularly in unfair dismissal, it's required for us to provide natural justice, which is that opportunity for the person affected to be heard. So we may have made a decision, we may have thought we've made a decision, but we do need to check and say, hey, to the employee, what have you got to say? Do you have any information that might change my mind? Do you have any information that can assist making a better decision here before we make that final decision? And secondly is procedural fairness. And I'm sure many people would be aware that unfair dismissal can be really quite technical, and you really need to follow a fair and transparent process. A lot of that's defined by the Fair Work Commission as to what that process should look like, how long it should take, how you do it. We've seen plenty of cases in the media where employees have been sacked by text or phone call or things like that. It really needs to be more formal because it's a serious decision. So procedural fairness, the way that we go about it. Just to note, a small business, there is a small business code on the Fair Work Commission's website that really guides you through procedural fairness as well. So it's important to have natural justice and procedural fairness in any of these decisions.
How can we prevent unfair dismissal?
Anthony, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about performance management and doing that better. If this is where it should all start, an unfair dismissal should not be a surprise to an employee or an employer that comes out of the blue. We should be really investing in the performance of our workforce and holding our managers to account for feedback through our employment relationship. So it all comes down to how we manage performance in the workplace to prevent these situations, because when they do unfortunately end up in termination, they become technical, they can create issues with colleagues in the workplace. In a small town such as Albany, people hear about it, know about it, and rumours go around and gossip goes around, etc. So prevention generally comes from, how we invest in a person's performance in the workplace well before a termination outcome. But then going down, and as I've mentioned there, whether it's natural justice, procedural fairness, and just having a look at what underpins the technicality of unfair dismissal, we can prevent it by following a fair process and giving the person the say. And look, sometimes at the end of the day, a dismissal does need to occur. We just need to make sure that it's not unfair and it considers all the appropriate information. So just to summarise, I try and prevent these situations to begin with, not leave them as a surprise to an employee one day. But then if we are doing that, make sure, probably seek advice, but if not, really delve into the resources of the Fair Work Commission to make sure you're doing it right.
Yeah, really helpful. Thank you very much, HR expert Jonathan Woolfrey. Catch up with you again next week, Jonathan.
Look forward to it. Thanks, Anthony.